The early 1970s marked a very rough patch for the Godzilla franchise. Godzilla vs. Hedorah took a bold experimental approach, but critics and audiences at the time just weren't impressed. Producer Tomoyuki Tanaka saw the numbers and made a decision. No more risks. The film had drawn just 400,000 people to theaters, while re-releases of films like Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster and Invasion of the Astro-Monster pulled nearly double in comparison. The message to the executives was crystal clear. People wanted classic monsters duking it out, not social commentary. Ironic, considering that the entire franchise itself was created as a means of delivering social commentary. Regardless, money talks. So Tanaka greenlit a brand new Godzilla project, and this time he was playing it real safe. Like, really safe. That meant bringing back King Ghidorah, a proven fan favorite, and introducing a new villain, Gigan, designed by illustrator Takayoshi Mizuki with input from special effects director Teruyoshi Nakano. Two writers, Shinichi Sekizawa and Kaoru Mabuchi, were tasked with creating separate drafts, but both were given the same checklist: Ghidorah, Gigan, and for some reason, a giant theme park attraction called Godzilla Tower. I don't know why that was mandatory, but regardless. This was a film built on budget cuts, and it shows. There's very obviously a heavy reliance on stock footage from previous entries, and that was the idea going into it. The soundtrack is cobbled together from older Toho films, and the suits, especially King Ghidorah, are looking pretty rough. Even Haruo Nakajima, the original Godzilla suit actor, bowed out after this installment, making it his final performance as Godzilla in a feature-length film. This movie stands as a very clear reflection of Toho's shifting approach to the series, prioritizing recognizable elements and cost-saving measures over innovation and experimentation. Beyond that, they continued to try and aim these movies more towards children despite the vulgar language and excessive blood and gore. It's one of my least favorite entries in the entire franchise, so let's just get it over with. This is Godzilla vs. Gigan. Freelance manga artist Gendo takes a job at World Children's Land, a theme park whose main attraction is Godzilla Tower, a full-scale replica of the King of the Monsters. But the park hides a sinister secret. Its staff are actually cockroach-like aliens from the M Space Hunter Nebula, using the tower to lure Godzilla into a trap while unleashing their own kaiju, Gigan and King Ghidorah, to devastate Tokyo. When Gendo and his allies uncover the truth, they scramble to fight back, sabotaging the aliens' operations while Godzilla and Anguirus arrive from Monster Island. Gigan's buzzsaw and Godzilla Tower's laser beams leave the King of the Monsters critically wounded, but a last-minute explosion destroys the tower, breaking the aliens' control over their monsters. Regaining their senses, Gigan and Ghidorah retreat, leaving Godzilla and Anguirus victorious. With Tokyo saved, the Earth monsters return home as Gendo and his friends celebrate. The pacing in Godzilla vs. Gigan is downright atrocious. It takes forever to get going. Almost the entire first half is dedicated to sluggish, meandering human drama that isn't engaging enough to justify its runtime. A good monster movie knows how to balance its human and kaiju elements, but this one just backloads everything, and it's a slog that doesn't pay off quickly enough. And even when Godzilla and Anguirus do finally make their grand entrance, they're still stuck on Monster Island, meaning the movie continues to stall as we watch them slowly swim to Japan. It's an exercise in patience, one that isn't particularly rewarding if we're being completely honest. And then there's the action, which is kind of baffling considering who this movie is supposedly made for. Godzilla vs. Gigan was clearly meant to be a kids' movie. The tone, the human characters, the exaggerated villainous plot, everything points to this film being a movie that's squarely aimed at children, and yet the violence is insanely over the top. Poor Anguirus. The world's most loyal punching bag takes a full-speed dive directly into it, spraying blood all over the camera. It's like something out of a horror movie. It's brutal. If you told me this movie was ghost-written by Quentin Tarantino, I might actually believe you.
Oh, what the fuck's happening? Oh, man, shit, man! Oh man, I shot Marvin in the face.
While we're on the subject of tone, there's also the profanity.
You're a hard bitch.
I don't think every family movie needs to be like extremely sanitized into oblivion, but you have to wonder what was going through Toho's head when they let this one through. Godzilla vs. Gigan feels like it got lost on its way to being a grindhouse flick, and honestly, that version might have been way more interesting. However, this film was cursed by studio interference, or more specifically, Tomoyuki Tanaka's need to stick to a tired formula in order to make as much money as possible. I get it. You gotta make money. That's kind of why movies are made nowadays, unfortunately, and even back then that was still the case, but like, a major issue that I have with Godzilla vs. Gigan is the way the monster action is shot. Most of the kaiju battles take place at night, which isn't necessarily a problem on its own. After all, Godzilla 54 staged nearly all of its monster sequences in nighttime settings, and those scenes looked fantastic. Moody, atmospheric, visually striking. A lot of that has to do with it being in black and white, but still. Even Godzilla vs. Hedorah, the film that came out 1 year prior, looks way better than this. Godzilla vs. Gigan, on the other hand, looks cheap and muddled, and trust me, this isn't a format issue. I've seen this movie in every release imaginable, from old VHS tapes to various DVD prints and even the Criterion Blu-ray, and no matter what, it always looks just bad. Everything is underexposed, covered in this ugly, washed-out dark tint, making it hard to appreciate any of the monster action on screen. I think what happened is the filmmakers were going for a day-for-night effect, but if that was their intention, then they absolutely botched it. For those that are unfamiliar, day-for-night is a filmmaking technique where scenes are shot in broad daylight and later altered in post-production to appear as if they take place at night. When done well, it can be very convincing. When done poorly, it looks like someone slapped a cheap Instagram filter over the footage and called it a day. I've done this in my own work. I've had establishing shots that are made day for night, and it's very difficult to pull off. It's like, I think even when I did it, it sucks. It's something that you really shouldn't do as a filmmaker. Like, it's that last resort thing that you should ever try and do, and frankly, Godzilla vs. Gigan falls squarely into the this is a clusterfuck category in terms of its imagery. The most glaring issue, I think at least, is how inconsistently this effect is applied, especially when the movie leans on stock footage from earlier Godzilla movies. Since many of these old fight scenes were shot during the day, the filmmakers then had to recolor the footage to match the artificially darkened nighttime setting. The result? A total mess. The brightness levels fluctuate wildly, the hues don't really match, and some shots just look completely unnatural, like they were run through a bad photocopy machine. And speaking of stock footage, there's a lot of it. Way too much of it. At times, you could say it borders on being a clip show like Godzilla's Revenge, where it reuses so many scenes from prior movies that it feels like a greatest hits reel rather than a fresh original movie. This, combined with the poorly handled nighttime visuals, makes the entire movie feel like it was cobbled together with whatever scraps Toho had lying around. And yeah, that was the case. It's really hard to stay engaged with the kaiju action when so much of it feels so disjointed, recycled, and frankly, badly lit. Like, people rip on Godzilla 2014, but like, hoo boy. If you know me and you've seen some of my videos, you know how much I hate when Godzilla acts out of character. It's a big reason why I can't stand Ebirah Horror of the Deep. And I've already talked about that in depth. We're not going to talk about that here. But this is another instance where I have no idea why the filmmakers thought this was a good idea.
Something funny going on. You better check. Oh, yeah.
It's so egregiously out of character for Godzilla to literally speak.
Hey, Akira, come on. There's a lot of trouble ahead.
In the Japanese version, there was just a little thought bubble, right? And that was it. And that's still pretty egregious, I think, at least. But in the English dub, he actually talks, and I hate every second of it. The worst part is that Godzilla vs. Gigan didn't need this nonsense in the first place. Other Showa-era films like Destroy All Monsters and Son of Godzilla proved that clever visual storytelling was more than enough to convey what the monsters were thinking and feeling.
Ooh, Godzilla, what terrible language!
We never needed speech bubbles or dubbed-over dialogue to understand the relationships between the kaiju. Through body language, fight choreography, and expressive suit acting, Toho had already perfected the art of kaiju communication, so why throw that out the window and have Godzilla literally speak? It feels like a desperate gimmick, something thrown out because the filmmakers didn't trust the audience, kids included, to pick up on the basic visual cues. And that makes no sense to me. When I was a kid, I watched films like Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, and I completely understood everything they were doing and why they did what they did. This is something I hate in filmmaking. It's where the filmmaker thinks that, oh, the audience is stupid and I need to bring the film down to their level, right? I need to make it where I'm way smarter than the audience, so we have to think like 5 steps ahead. And in the end, this isn't just a bad scene. I think it's honestly the worst part of the entire movie. On the flip side, I'll throw Godzilla vs. Gigan a bone and say that the human characters are actually kind of fun. Gendo and his friends aren't exactly compelling in a dramatic sense, but there's something oddly endearing about them. Their plot, centered around a struggling manga artist stumbling into an alien conspiracy, is very goofy, but at least they have some personality. Unlike the painfully dull casts of other Godzilla films, like Destroy All Monsters, Gengo and his ragtag group of hippies and outcasts actually feel like characters rather than glorified exposition machines. It's still, not great by any means. I mean, am I reaching for positives here? Absolutely. I don't want to seem like I'm just, beating this movie to a pulp. But when the rest of the movie is this much of a mess, I'll take what I can get. Another highlight is the M Space Hunter Nebula aliens, a group of villainous extraterrestrials disguised as humans, who in reality are giant cockroaches. Right away, that's a big step up from the Kilax and Destroy All Monsters, who had all the menace of a group of sleep-deprived librarians. The cockroach aliens don't quite reach the same level of intrigue or intimidation as, say, the Exilians, who remain as the gold standard for Godzilla franchise alien invaders, but what makes the M Space Hunter Nebula aliens stand out is their sheer weirdness. They're not just humanoid aliens, they're actual insects hiding in human skin. That's genuinely creepy and a fantastic concept for a villain. Again, maybe not for a kid's movie, but regardless, the problem is that the movie barely shows them. It's obvious that this was a budget issue, but honestly, I don't care. If you're going to introduce giant cockroach monsters, at least have the decency to give me one rubber suit, even if it looks like it belongs in the Toxic Avenger. This is the same movie that features a cyborg space chicken with a buzzsaw for a stomach. Why not lean into the absurdity even more? As nonsensical as their entire subplot is, I have to give the M Space Hunter Nebula cockroaches some credit. They're some of the most memorable alien villains in the entire Godzilla series. Sure, they're underutilized, and the film doesn't really go as far with them as they could have, but their bizarre premise alone makes them stand out in a way that other Showa-era invaders really don't. By the way, I think we should talk about Gigan now. I've mentioned him here and there throughout this retrospective, but now feels like the right time to really dig in. First and foremost, I gotta be honest, I'm not a fan of the Showa-era Gigan design. This version of the character just feels so lame. He's less of a formidable kaiju and more of a punchline. A very destructive and vindictive goofball villain who stumbles his way through fights rather than commanding any real presence. It wasn't until Godzilla Final Wars that Gigan was finally legitimized as a true threat, with a sleeker redesign, enhanced abilities, and an actual sense of menace. That said though, I can't deny that the Showa version of Gigan still has a unique look that fits right at home in the Godzilla universe. He's undeniably iconic, even if he is kind of a bit of a joke. As a kid, I always wondered what a non-cyborg version of Gigan would have looked like. What was he before the aliens turned him into their chainsaw-limbed enforcer? Was he always this weird, or did they slap the buzzsaw and hook hands onto an otherwise normal space dinosaur? Regardless of his origins, there's one thing about Showa Gigan that I do really appreciate, and that is he is a sadistic bastard. He's not just a mindless monster stomping around because the plot requires it. He seems to be enjoying the mayhem, which I really like. You could see it in the way he laughs mid-battle, the way he toys with his opponents, and the way he deliberately prolongs suffering. There's a level of cruelty to him that you don't always get with other kaiju, and I'll admit, it gives him just a little bit of a cool factor. The chest buzzsaw, the hook hands, they're all great ideas, but every time I watch him in action, I can't help but compare him to the Final Wars version, a version that takes all these elements and actually makes them intimidating. Showa Gigan is a blueprint, but Final Wars Gigan is the fully realized version of the character. On the other hand, Anguirus is always a welcome addition. I've always liked seeing him team up with Godzilla, mostly because it doesn't happen nearly as often as you'd think. Unlike a lot of other Godzilla allies, Anguirus actually feels like a loyal companion, even if their relationship is never explicitly defined. Of course, the real reason he's in Godzilla vs. Gigan is a lot more practical. The filmmakers had a relatively new suit left over from Destroy All Monsters, and they wanted to get some extra mileage out of it. But despite being included for cost-cutting reasons, Anguirus adds a lot of charm to the film. His scrappy underdog energy makes him fun to watch, and I wish he had been given more opportunities to shine in the Showa era. He's often relegated to a supporting role, but he deserved at least one movie where he got to take the center stage beyond Raids again. Now, I don't want to dogpile on Godzilla vs. Gigan for being cheap. It had an incredibly limited budget, and I respect the lengths that they went to just to get the film made. But let's be real for a second. The flaws are impossible to ignore. The over-reliance on stock footage and stock music is bad enough, but the wear and tear on the production is painfully obvious. The Godzilla suit is literally falling apart in some shots. You can see chunks of the suit peeling off his arms. King Ghidorah fares even worse. The flying puppet used for him looks really stiff and lifeless, especially when compared to how fluid and expressive he looked in earlier films. This is supposed to be the ultimate threat, and yet he looks like a deflated parade balloon. It's night and day when you compare this to Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, or even Destroy All Monsters. I get it, this is a Godzilla movie from 1972 with a low budget. I'm not expecting groundbreaking realism from a man-in-a-suit monster brawl, but the difference between Godzilla vs. Gigan and its predecessors is that those earlier movies still made an effort to maintain a sense of grandeur. Ghidorah looked alive before. His heads moved independently and snapping and thrashing like they had minds of their own. But here, he barely moves, and that's a problem. Sure, you can write off a lot of the film's shortcomings as budgetary limitations, but a flaw is still a flaw. If the effects are so rough that they actively take me out of the movie, that's not something I can easily brush aside. A lack of money doesn't really mean that you get a free pass. It means that you have to get more creative with what you have. Godzilla vs. Gigan does the best it can, but sometimes that's just not enough. Moving towards the international releases, Godzilla vs. Gigan debuted in the US in 1977 as Godzilla on Monster Island. It's a weird title. Most of the film doesn't really take place on Monster Island, beyond maybe 5 minutes. Regardless, the company that made this edit, CinemaShares, did various things to make it more of a G rating, like not having a curse word and trimming down some of the violent scenes, and replacing the original Japanese speech bubbles with English dialogue for Godzilla and Anguirus. Voice actor Ted Thomas had the honor of voicing the Big G, being the first person to ever voice Godzilla in a movie in that specific way. Meanwhile, in the UK, the film was released theatrically as War of the Monsters, which seems to be a very popular title internationally since that was also the title of 1966's Gamera vs. Barugon and 1965's Invasion of Astro-Monster, with the latter receiving that title in Brazil only. And honestly, the English dub is fine. It's not the worst dub I've ever heard, but it isn't the best. At the end of the day, Godzilla vs. Gigan is a fundamentally flawed film. Like any Godzilla movie, it has its highlights, but the lowlights definitely overshadow them in this specific instance. The pacing is an absolute slog. The monster action is clunky and riddled with stock footage. And the film's overall presentation feels haphazard at best. Even by the standards of the later Showa era's cheaper, more kid-friendly entries, this one feels like it's scraping the bottom of the barrel. But that being said, I can't bring myself to outright hate this movie. As much as I've ripped into it, there's something oddly endearing about its jankiness. The absurdity of the M Space Hunter Nebula aliens, the sheer audacity of Godzilla and Anguirus talking, and the bizarre tonal dissonance add up to something that, at the very least, is memorable. Not necessarily good, but memorable. If nothing else, the film introduced Gigan, who would go on to become one of the most beloved kaiju in the entire franchise. Even if his Showa incarnation is a bit of a joke, his design is undeniably pretty cool, and his sadistic personality does give him some entertainment value. This is the kind of film that I'd only recommend to hardcore Godzilla fans or those with a high tolerance for cheap, schlocky entertainment. It's a fascinating example of Toho cutting every corner imaginable while still managing to churn out something that technically qualifies as a movie. For casual viewers though, there are better Showa-era films to check out. Ones that don't feel like they were held together with duct tape and a prayer. With all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick. You're watching Firewood Media. This is part 12 of my massive Godzilla retrospective project, where I revisit and review every single Godzilla movie and TV show. I've already talked about the majority of the MonsterVerse and of course every Showa era that came before this film, so stay tuned because I'll be covering the fan favorite Godzilla vs. Megalon next. After that, I'll be taking an in-depth look at Zone Fighter, a TV show produced by Toho that was created for the sole purpose of competing with other tokusatsu Monster of the Week shows like Ultraman. Godzilla appears in several episodes, so that means it has to be covered here as part of the retrospective series. Beyond this Godzilla series, I'm working on a separate retrospective on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, I'll be publishing that as one big video rather than covering each movie and show in individual videos. If everything goes according to plan, that video should be out on May 2nd to coincide with the release of Thunderbolts. Big thank you to all of our channel members. Their names are listed right here. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.